Hello, my name is Doug Scott. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I run a private practice here in the Dallas area. I have a master's in pastoral ministry as well as clinical social work from Boston College, and I've been working for 20 plus years in the nexus between spirituality and psychology. And today I'm going to be introducing a topic that is making its way slowly into the mainstream, but I find it to be absolutely essential. And I've been incorporating this topic, in my practice. So I'm going to give you, the audience, my dearly beloved brothers and sisters, an entry level presentation on the law of three. Throughout this topic, throughout this presentation, I will be reading from an article that I published under the auspices of this presentation, and it will also include the images. And so what I'm going to be doing is reading verbatim the article and also describing the images. And my goal, my hope, is to do all of this in 50 minutes, and that you don't need to have your computer to watch the presentation. What I'm hoping is I can describe things well enough so that if you don't have your computer or you're listening this through a podcast or something like that, that you will also benefit. The most important piece here is that you and I create a loving presence for each other. And in the eternal now of God, time doesn't matter. So whenever you're listening to this, there we are together. The title of this presentation is called How Practical Knowledge of the Law of Three Can Transform Your Relationships with Yourself, Others, and God. Introduction. In a world increasingly characterized by polarization, conflict, and seemingly irreconcilable differences, many of us find ourselves trapped in repetitive cycles of struggle in our most important relationships, with ourselves, with loved ones, and with the divine. What if there exists a fundamental pattern woven into the very fabric of reality that could help us navigate these tensions and transform them into opportunities for growth and deeper connection? This pattern, known as the Law of Three, or what I call the principle of teleopotentiation, offers a profound framework for understanding how meaningful change and development can occur, not by eliminating tension, but by engaging with it consciously and purposefully. The Law of Three describes a consistent process through which all genuine growth and transformation unfold. Every contrast creates potential for tension. Every tension creates potential for resolution, and every resolution creates potential for a higher level contrast. Rather than a simple back and forth cycle that returns to its starting point, this principle, the Law of Three, creates a spiral pattern of development where each resolution leads to a more sophisticated and expansive level of experience. This is not mere theoretical abstraction, but a practical description of how everything from biological organisms to psychological development to spiritual awakening progresses through increasingly complex levels of integration while maintaining harmony and balance. Why does this matter? Because this pattern appears to be the fundamental operating principle behind all evolutionary processes. From the emergence of life, from inorganic matter to the development of consciousness to the refinement of spiritual insight. As philosopher Alfred North Whitehead suggested, this pattern allows the universe to continuously expand its experiential knowledge of itself through increasingly sophisticated expressions while maintaining coherence. The three phases, contrast, tension, and resolution, create the basic rhythm through which all growth occurs, whether in cell division, psychological maturation, relationship development, or spiritual transformation. The wisdom traditions have long recognized this pattern. In Christianity, one of my favorite authors, Cynthia Bourgeault, reframes the Trinity not as static entities, but as a dynamic forces, affirming force, denying force, and reconciling force. These forces generate new possibilities when they interact. Similarly, Eastern traditions speak of the interplay between opposing forces, generating a third thing that transcends and includes its origins. What makes this principle so powerful is its universal applicability across domains and scales, suggesting it reflects something fundamental about how reality itself unfolds. The developmental process this pattern describes is neither random nor predetermined, but rather guided by what I term a telos or polar north. That's a guiding purpose that orients growth towards increasingly harmonious and complex expressions. This developmental journey isn't about eliminating contrast or tension. These actually remain essential to the process, but about engaging with them consciously from increasingly sophisticated levels of awareness, guided by our highest values and purposes. Our exploration of this principle examines how it manifests in human relationships at multiple levels. First, in the quote, tension between mirrors, Emily and Marcus, unquote, we see a couple whose contrasting childhood wounds, Emily's experience with the controlling perfectionist mother, an emotionally absent father, and Marcus's exposure to an alcoholic father's unpredictable rage and a mother's internalized depression, created unconscious patterns that played out in their relationship. Their journey illustrates how bringing these tensions into conscious awareness allowed them to transform projections into understanding, victimhood into agency, and pain into growth. Through their growing capacity to recognize ambivalence, articulate values, and maintain orientation towards a polar north of mutual flourishing, Emily and Marcus gradually moved up the developmental spiral, creating a relationship that healed rather than perpetuated intergenerational wounds. In the second or third section, what I call the sacred deconstruction, Emily and Marcus find God anew, we witness how the Law of Three operates in spiral development, rather spiritual development. Emily's journey from seeing God as a cosmic scorekeeper to experiencing divine presence as unconditional love, and Marcus's evolution from emotional distance to foundational trust in divine consistency. These demonstrate how our unconscious projections shape our spiritual life. They're parallel processes of deconstruction or death, uncertainty, or what I call tomb time, and reconstruction or resurrection, illustrate how spiritual growth often requires passing through phases of disorientation before emerging into more expansive understanding. Their reconstructed faith integrates multiple levels of consciousness. We have traditional, modern, postmodern, and integral levels of consciousness, while maintaining connection to their deepest values. What follows in this presentation explores the practical applications of the Law of Three across dimensions of human experience. You will discover how recognizing the location of tension, whether unconscious or subconscious or conscious, dramatically affects your capacity for growth. You'll learn specific practices for what I call midwifing resolution in situations of conflict by locating ambivalence, identifying shared virtues or values, and maintaining orientation toward higher purposes. And you'll explore how this principle, the principle of teleopotentiation or the Law of Three, can transform your understanding of spiritual development, offering a framework that honors both ancient wisdom and contemporary insights about human consciousness. The Law of Three isn't a technique to eliminate life's challenges, but a wisdom tradition that helps us engage with those challenges in ways that foster growth rather than stagnation, connection rather than division, and transformation rather than transmission of pain. By understanding and applying this principle, we can learn to navigate life's inevitable tensions with greater consciousness, compassion, and creativity, transforming our relationships with ourselves, others, and the divine in the process. Now I would like to read what Cynthia Bourgeault explains as the Law of Three from her perspective. And I got this information from the Center for Action and Contemplation, the cac.org, and it's under their daily meditations. Cynthia Bourgeault explains, from a metaphysical standpoint, the Trinity is primarily about process. It encapsulates a paradigm of change and a transformation based on an ancient metaphysical principle known as the Law of Three. The basic foundational principles are as follows. Number one, in every new arising, there are three forces involved: affirming, denying, and reconciling. Number two, the interweaving of the three produces a fourth and a new dimension. Number three, affirming, denying, and reconciling are not fixed points or permanent essence attributes, but rather can and do shift and must be discerned situationally. Number four, solutions to impasses or sticking points generally come by learning how to spot and mediate third force, which is present in every situation, but generally hidden. He offers this perspective. Let us consider a simple example. A seed, as Jesus says, quote, unless it falls into the ground and dies, remains a single seed, unquote. That's from John chapter 12, verse 24. If this seed does fall into the ground, it enters a sacred transformative process. Seed, the first or affirming force, meets ground, the second or denying force. And at that, it has to be moist ground, water being its most critical first component. But even in this counter, nothing will happen until sunlight, the third or reconciling force, enters the equation. Then among the three, they generate a sprout, which is an actualization of the possibility latent in the seed and a whole new field of possibility. She offers actually the entire Paschal mystery, which is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, can be seen to play itself out as a fairly straightforward configuration of the Law of Three. If you assign affirming force as Jesus, the human teacher of the path of love, denying as the crucifixion and the forces of hatred driving it, and reconciling as the principle of self-emptying or kenotic love, willingly engaged, then the fourth or new arising, which is inescapably revealed through this weaving, is the kingdom of heaven, visibly manifest in the very midst of all human cruelty and brokenness. Now, what I would like to offer is my perspective. I've mentioned a little bit above, but I'm going to repeat some of that now. The Law of Three, which I am entitling the Principle of Teleopotentiation. Teleopotentiation is a principle that explains how purposeful growth occurs through a three-phase process. The term combines two key elements. Teleo from Greek, the Greek telos, means purpose, end, or aim. Potentiation, coming from the process of enhancing potential or power. Together, the term refers to growth that is guided by a specific purpose or aim. The process works through three connected phases. Contrast creates potential for tension. Tension creates potential for resolution. Resolution creates potential for higher level contrast. Again, this creates a spiral pattern of growth rather than a simple cycle, where each new level encompasses greater breadth and depth than the previous one. The process serves to expand experiential knowledge, which is what we call gnosis, while maintaining harmony and balance, allowing for increasingly sophisticated development without descending into chaos. The concept, of course, parallels the Christian idea of metanoia, reaching higher levels of experience by successfully resolving tensions between contrasting forces. In the first slide, I have depicted the law of three, and it is a spiral where in the middle of four concentric circles is a solid black circle entitled telos. Telos is the very ingredient that aims and orients the particular potentiation or the building up of power, potential power before it is released. With potentiation, we have a contrast, and that creates intention. The tension seeks, really screams for a resolution. And if we learn to listen to these contrasts and tensions well, it can lead to a next higher level contrast. We might stay in that for a while until we become aware of that next level tension. And taking from what we've learned before when we've gone around this circle, we employ that plus any new ways that we're trying to resolve this tension, this next level tension. And that actually brings us into a third, even higher contrast. So on and so forth. The cycle continues, and thus the spiral of metanoia unfolds as we journey through life. But this particular presentation, as we will see, tries to provide the conceptual framing while letting us see that it doesn't always have to lead to a higher a higher contrast. Because if we are not paying attention to our inner life, we often will find a resolution, but it will be one of the same resonance and consciousness level that created the contrast and tension to begin with. So we're going to discuss that. The next slide here is every contrast potentiates a tension. Here I have two circles side by side. One is white and one is black. And if you can imagine the place right in between where they meet, that is the location of potentiated tension. There's not tension yet, but the two opposite colored circles certainly are a contrast. And where their sides gently touch, that will be the site of the contrast and thus the tension. Now you can imagine taking these two circles and from the outer edge of each one, pushing it towards the middle. In the picture, I have two screws on the outside, and you can twist the screws and they push the circles together, creating the middle part, which becomes an overlap in between them. And that overlap, as it increases inside, that would mark the tension that is there. And we're going to talk about how that looks. But maybe in the moment, I can ask you to think about maybe something in your life right now that might create some tension. Maybe there's an expectation that is not being met. We all have these tensions. Usually we call these contrasts that create the tension, we call them conflicts, or we call them problems. And I am offering in this presentation is perhaps we could look at them not as negative things or conflicts or even problems, but rather, what if we were to just employ the word contrast? I think that might be more metaphysically responsible and accurate, because if we call them contrasts, then we can also speak about the inherent tension inside of the contrast that we affectively feel. And it is through that feeling of the tension inside of us that we can begin to potentiate the resolution with some kind of conscious awareness. So feeling the inner contrasts is step one. and honoring the tension as the very denying force that Cynthia Bourgeault talks about as a law of three. The denying force would be the tension itself, and we want to overcome, or we're seeking a resolution of that. So the denying force is to be honored, because without it, there is no evolution or development. What I'd like to share here is that this tension occurs in the mind, at least. Most often it is in the unconscious or subconscious. So here, if you can picture the iceberg, it's always very helpful to picture an iceberg. Above the water would be the conscious mind. Right below the water, we have the subconscious mind, and below that, the unconscious mind. As we will see, tension often occurs. This tension of the contrast inside of us will occur and take place in the unconscious or subconscious. And the goal, as we will see, is to bring it to the conscious mind so we can actually see what we're trying to resolve with some sense of conscious agency. Okay, here I have the two circles. Now we have one circle that is connecting the two that is above it, and this is a gold circle, or we have another one that is connected and runs through the middle of the place of tension, and it is downward located, and it is red. So the gold circle represents the potentiated resolution, and it is a bridge to a higher order contrast. Whereas the red, which its top is in the middle of that tension area and goes downward, it actually potentiates resolution indeed, but it is a bridge to the status quo contrast. Here we do not have resolution that takes us to the next layer and level. So we must remember, in the law of three, every tension potentiates a resolution, but depending on how awake we are and how aware of that contrast, the resolution might be a higher order. I've colored gold here, or it might be one of the status quo to keep us rotating around. And that would be more of the red in this particular image. The idea here is to midwife resolution, or midwifing resolution. Okay. And one of the first steps I do with my clients, and of course myself, is to start to feel where the ambivalence is. Where is the ambivalence? Now, that's an interesting word, ambivalence. In English, ambi actually comes from the Latin, means both or on both sides. Valentia, which is also Latin, means strength or having value. So together, ambivalence means that I am feeling a value on both sides, or there is a force on both sides. There's one force and there's another force on both sides of me that is strong, and thus I'm kind of caught in the middle. And it is super important to help others, and including ourselves, to recognize where this inner ambivalence is. So I'm just going to give a simple example here just to illustrate the point. I'm thinking of maybe an experience where I would like to eat better. Almost 50 years old, it would be nice to have a healthier body. It's not too bad at this point, but I'm certainly not 25 and I can't eat like I'm 25 anymore. Now, on one side, I have the desire to have a healthier lifestyle. Okay, so that's a force that is there. It is in my subconscious and conscious mind. It's something I feel a desire toward. On the other hand, equally there, but not always as conscious, is what I would have to give up were I to choose a stronger, a healthier lifestyle, a healthier way to eat. What that would include, of course, might be sacrificing certain time for increased exercise. It would certainly eliminate my desire to eat chips before bed. Or, yeah, these kinds of things. I do love some pretzels, but I have to give it up. But notice that equally on this side would be my sacred no, what I don't want, and the fear that change of lifestyle is there, and how addicted I might be to my own status quo. That is equally there. That is the ambivalence. Okay. Now, in your own life, there might be something like that. And depending on how well I can name that ambivalence is very indicative of which resolution am I going to choose. Am I going to choose the higher order, the resolution that brings me to the next level of contrast? Or am I going to choose a resolution that will continue the status quo? And so what I have here in the slide is it's important to realize there's always ambivalence when there's a contrast. When you feel that tension caused by the contrast, know that there's ambivalence. There's two strong forces on either side, and it is important to name both of those forces. So, for example, you could say, I can really see how you feel trapped between this and that. So if you're a counselor helping your clients or friends and yourself to be able to name those parts, those ambivalence ingredients that go into the ambivalence. Okay, in this next slide, I have it entitled as midwifing resolution. Right smack dab in the middle between the two original contrasting circles that have been pushed together to create this third area where the tension is located. Right in the middle of that is a sphere. In this particular image, I have the sphere as a transparent dark gray or black sphere. And this is the sense of self that emerges through each registered tension. Each time we feel a tension, there's a sense of self that begins to percolate and say, I have agency here. You may not be aware of my agency, but I have agency. And our goal in this presentation is to bring that agency to its highest and greatest if possible. So here's what I would like to honor and offer. The absolute pivotal point that I think is incredibly important for counselors, for Christians, for anybody who's in the faith or any spiritual tradition or of no spiritual tradition, because it's just true. And it goes like this. We have to locate a polar north or an aim or a goal or a virtue or a desire. So many times in my counseling experience, as well as myself, people are unsure of actually what we want. Therefore, you or I, who would like to take this teaching and use it as a kind of pastoral protocol, I'm inviting us to cultivate the telos. Remember what telos means, the direction or goal or aim. So we need to cultivate the telos. And by asking, what is your goal here? What do you want? And in this particular image, I'd like you to see in your mind's eye a mirror that is in front of the circles. Okay, the sense of self located in the middle of the intertwining circles. And then there's a mirror. And in the mirror is that sense of self, but it is not gray or black. It is golden, because golden is the archetypal color of wholeness. And what we're trying to do is imagine, vocalize, project in front of us, keep in the forefront of our minds our highest and greatest imagination of the goal, what it would look like, what we want to be. And that is thrust there, kept in a holy sanctuary in our heart, right in front of us, so that we use it as a mirror. And that ideal goal becomes the metric by which we can measure who we want to be in how we want to resolve our conflicts. It is our mirror. And also, the last thing I want to say about this particular image, this concept, is that inside of the mirror, inside of the sense of self that is golden, as I say, the reflection, our particular desire, our goal that is then projected outward. There is an inherent magnetism inside of it because it is the Holy Spirit at work pulling us forward like reins on a horse, pulling us forward, not demanding that we go forward. It is a luring, as Whitehead might say, a holy lure. It is a rest. It is a soft, peaceful, restful whisper that intrigues us. It is erotic, even. It's seducing us to move forward. And so it's like a magnet that's pulling on our heart, wanting us to move forward. And like Mary, we have to say yes to Gabriel, that we will allow God's work to be done in and through us. But God is not going to force God's self in and through us because that would violate God's own nature, which is love expressed in free will. Right? So the following slide here is what we see is when we project and we have our sacred yes in the polar north that we've created in this mirror. This is our mirror. When we have that, this is our sacred yes. This is what I'm saying yes to. This is what I am for. Before I utter anything of what I am against, this is what I am for. This is the cornerstone upon which I'm building my next realm of existence, my next rung of existence up the ladder of development. What it does is when I am keeping my mind in the present moment as well as this imaginal self that I'm creating, it exists in pure potentiation. But as I dialogue with that self, that part of me, that ideal part, I'm actually creating the mechanism through which I can activate it as I approach its time and place in the future. As I approach that, the present moment moves forward linearly and then embodies that. What happens is that projection on the mirror comes back to me in the present and projecting in the future and developing a relationship. It comes back to me in the present and starts to create that potentiated resolution, that bridge to the higher order of contrast. Okay. So in the image, we have an arrow moving from the sense of self in the present, lured by the Holy Spirit into the image of our virtue that we want to inhabit or embody. It's held in front of us like a mirror. And at the same time, there's another arrow that's pointing from the mirror back to the present self as I'm with this contrast internally. I'm inside of this contrast is inside of me and I feel it. Already I'm beginning to feel hope dawning now because I have a telos in front of me. I have a working subjective aim I'm working towards. And at the same time, this begins to activate slowly, potentiate certainly in higher and higher intensity, this next resolution that will again take me to a higher order being. On the other end of things, what we have is midwifing resolution. I'm sorry, at the other end of things, what we have is the opposite. Here we have an image that, again, I would like you to envision the sense of self as the gray or black small sphere in the middle of the three overlapping circles. But this time, the potentiated resolution circle, which is red, is not above, but rather below. This is the bridge to the status quo contrast that we talked about earlier. And in the mirror, yes, there is the mirror located here, but no polar north has been declared. There is no sacred yes that has come to the conscious mind, even though the Holy Spirit yet is the magnet inside that mirror, pulling us forward. The Holy Spirit beckons, but the invitation is unheard or ignored. And instead, imagine that sphere in the middle, that sense of self that we talked about. Instead of moving forward, it looks backward. It looks backward, and then there is the energy of what I am against. That is where my focal point is. I am against those people. I am against all my enemies. I am against him. I am against her. I am against myself. I hate that I do that. I hate that. I hate myself. I'm against it. You can feel this energy of being against, and it is what most people feel. Most people can tell you what they are against, and they have it at the tip of their tongue. And of course, that means that they must be for something, because how could you be against something if you didn't have something deeper that you're for? Hmm? Otherwise, you wouldn't be against anything. But to declare openly what we're for is very hard for people because they've never been invited that deep inside of themselves, even though they've lived their whole life knowing what they're against. So what happens there is we project our focus, our energy onto what we are against. We still feel the temptations, or we feel the tension of the contrast, but it does not lead to a potentiated resolution of a higher order, but rather when we start with what we're against, we intensify the very energies that brought this contrast to us to begin with. And what it does is it resolves the moment, maybe by passiveness or passive aggressivity or aggressiveness, but it resolves the moment of tension without leading to any kind of satisfying resolution. Keeps the peace, but it's not a true peace. It's peace without dealing with the issue, which isn't peace at all. Here I would like to say, when we do project our own angst and what we're against, the tension is sometimes located in the unconscious. Now, the unconscious mind is an area of the mind that we aren't even aware of yet. It is shrouded in shadow because it is clad in the darkness of unacknowledgement. Parts of ourselves that we have pushed down consciously or unconsciously, and there they are. Or it can be things that we inherited, intergenerational pain or trauma that we didn't know we inherited, and yet there it resides in the unconscious. Often, when we have internal tension made by a contrast, if that tension or contrast is located in our unconscious, we may not even feel it. Other people might feel it. Other people might feel our tension, but we do not. And that is what denial looks like. Okay. On the other hand, if that tension created by the contrast exists in our subconscious mind, which is right below the conscious mind, it's under the water, but these are things that we know are there that we're not yet ready to look at or acknowledge or fully deal with. I'll get to you later, kind of thing, huh? These things stay in the subconscious mind. The tension certainly is felt, but what is stopping us from fully examining it are two things. First, we haven't declared what we are for. What do we want? We haven't declared our holy telos, nor have we declared the fact that we are afraid to change. That fear of change, the fear of what we don't know yet, what sacrifice we might have, the FOMO, the fear of missing out that we feel like we might endure, that hasn't been acknowledged and vocalized yet. And thus we keep the tension just in the subconscious. So if we're helping pastorally somebody through this, I'd like to offer here that discovering our virtues, just helping another discover their virtues, cultivates hope. So I'd like you to see now that these virtues exist. Everybody has virtues, and they exist in the subconscious usually. These are the sacred yeses. These are the things that I hope that they're true about myself. And they exist in the subconscious usually. And this, if we're working with someone, we are trying to access these virtues by asking them simple techniques, asking them some questions to bring these virtues from the subconscious up to the conscious level. And I have found that considering our mortality surfaces them from the subconscious to the conscious level very well. So, one of the things that I like to do, and I invite you to consider doing this as well with yourself and with others, and that is this. You can ask, what 3 virtues do you really hope they say about you at your funeral? So imagine that you passed away and your spirit is able to view your loved ones gathered around your grave, and they're talking only good things about you. They're talking about how much you meant to them. What deep parts of your character did they find inspiring and want to embody and emulate? They want to have lived through them. Hmm? These are the virtues. So I'm asking you, what 3 virtues do you wish and really hope they say about you? And as a person may articulate the first virtue and second virtue and third virtue, it is important then to ask them, well, what does that mean? So if someone chooses love or loyalty or humor or caring, being there for somebody else, of course, there's going to intertwine these different virtues, but they will be unique in themselves as well. We can ask them, well, what does that mean to you? And get them to describe a few characteristics of what love means. In other words, how would someone else know that you love them if you ask them? And then get them to articulate, what actions would you do to embody love or that virtue, loyalty? What does it mean embodied actions wise to show through my behavior that I value the virtue of love or humor or being there or solidarity, courage? And it's amazing because once we do this with somebody, they become their own, if you will, therapist, because now in front of them is their sacred yes. This becomes the lever through which they will use to leverage their growth and create this new resolution of the contrast. So, in other words, if I want to be healthier, I will create a sacred yes. It might be, I desire to feel freer in my body, to feel looser in my body, to enjoy my body even more. That's my sacred yes. And then I can maybe say virtue is love, virtue is hard work. Another virtue might be really caring, engagement. These are different virtues I might have. And then I can talk about how I embody these virtues and then hold it together in my actions that I want to embody these virtues, hold those actions up together with my holy yes, my yes of having a freedom to enjoy my body more. So in what ways could I engage this freedom more? Well, all of a sudden, instead of saying, oh, FOMO, fear of missing out on all the good food, right before bed. Well, what if I were to say, yeah, I've got FOMO. I'm fine of missing out. Instead of fear of missing out, fine of missing out. Because I'm not really missing out on much. I'm choosing something greater. You feel the energy. It's just an entire shift here. And what happens in terms of this tension that is felt underneath the water, this tension that the contrasts make, it is brought from the unconscious or the subconscious right up to the conscious mind. There, the tension is felt, it is accepted, the resolution is planned and enacted. There is where transformation happens, where that tension is brought up, acknowledged, honored. As a teacher, the denying force in the law of 3 is given a place of honor upon the altar of transformation. And both the affirming force, denying force, the reconciling force, this sacred yes that I'm saying pivots the whole thing into a resolution that is ultimately satisfying and ushers me into the next rung around the next circle of metanoia that is just beyond where I am. And beforehand, there was no way to cross the chasm. But now, with my sacred yes ever before me, indeed, I have the courage to walk on that bridge. Here, I would like to read verbatim a story, a narrative. It's one that I made up, but it includes what we've talked about. And so this is not based on any particular clients, but you might say it's a conglomeration of very common clinical presentations. If you find yourself or someone you know inside of these, I honor that, and hopefully it intrigues you to listen and see how this story, this arc, bears resonance inside of you. The tension between mirrors, Emily and Marcus. Emily Mitchell stood at the kitchen counter, her hands gripping the marble edge as she tried to steady her breathing. The argument with Marcus had abruptly, seemingly from nowhere, the argument with Marcus had erupted, seemingly from nowhere. A simple question about dinner plans had somehow transformed into a heated exchange about responsibility, expectations, and accusations of not listening. I'm just trying to coordinate our schedules, she had said. But somewhere beneath those words lay a current of frustration that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Marcus had responded with that all too familiar withdrawal. His face shifted from engagement to a distant mask as he retreated emotionally. Whatever you think is best, he said in that tone that wasn't quite passive aggressive, but somehow suggested she was making too big a deal out of nothing. Now alone in the kitchen, after Marcus had retreated to his home office, Emily found herself wrestling with a familiar cycle of emotion. Anger at Marcus for shutting down, followed by guilt for pushing too hard, followed by a creeping sense of shame that whispered she was becoming just like her mother. The contrasting origins. Emily had grown up in a household where excellence wasn't celebrated. It was expected. Her mother, Catherine, ran the family with military precision, measuring love and achievements and obedience. Report cards with anything less than A's were met with icy disappointment. Not because Catherine didn't care, but because in her mind, demanding perfection was the ultimate expression of maternal love. I just want what's best for you, she would say as Emily fought back tears over a B plus in calculus. Her father, Richard, had provided financially but remained emotionally absent, disappearing into work and emerging only to nod approvingly at achievements or to back up Catherine's disciplinary decisions. Their home functioned with a clock-like efficiency, but warmth was the sacrificial lamb on the altar of achievement. Marcus Reeves had navigated an entirely different chaos. His father, James, oscillated between charismatic charm and terrifying rage, with alcohol serving as the unpredictable catalyst between states. One night, James would be the life of an impromptu living room dance party. The next, he'd be hurling verbal grenades at Marcus and his mother, Linda. Linda had once been vibrant, but had gradually disappeared into herself, her unprocessed rage manifesting as debilitating fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. He spent days in darkened rooms while Marcus learned to make himself invisible or useful, depending on which strategy might help keep the peace. His natural intelligence became his escape hatch. Books and academics offered a world where rules made sense and excellence brought consistent rewards. Contrasting forces. Remember, every contrast creates potential for tension. Emily remembered reading in a book on relationships. She and Marcus represented contrasting adaptations to childhood wounds. She had become hypervigilant and controlling, while he had mastered the art of emotional withdrawal. Their early relationship had felt like liberation. Marcus admired Emily's drive and clarity, while she was drawn to the intellectual depth and calm demeanor of Marcus. Each represented what the other lacked, creating a powerful affirming force in their connection. But as the honeymoon phase of their relationship waned, the denying force emerged. Emily's organizational tendencies began to feel to Marcus like the same controlling environment he'd escaped. Meanwhile, Marcus's emotional distance triggered Emily's deepest fears of abandonment and insignificance, the same feelings she'd experienced with her emotional unavailable father. I feel like I'm always chasing you, Emily had said during a recent argument. Well, I feel like I can never do enough to meet your standards, Marcus had countered. Both felt victimized by the other, neither recognizing how they were each transmitting rather than transforming their childhood pain. The tension between them remained largely in their subconscious minds, felt but unacknowledged, creating what their couples therapist had called an itch that cannot be scratched because it's not seen. The midwife moment. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through planning a memorial service for Marcus's mother who had passed away after years of declining health. As they sat together sorting through old photographs, Marcus found himself sharing stories Emily had never heard. She used to paint, he said, showing Emily a watercolor landscape. Yeah, before everything got so dark for her. Emily looked at the vibrant colors on the canvas, so different from the faded woman she had met only a few times. What happened? She said. Well, the life just drained out of her year by year, Marcus said quietly. She never fought back against Dad. She just absorbed it all until there was nothing left. Emily felt something shift as she watched tears form in Marcus's eyes, a rare display of emotion from him. That's what you are afraid of, isn't it? He asked gently. That if you engage with conflict, you'll either become your father or disappear like your mother. The question hung in the air between them, creating what Emily would later recognize as a potentiated resolution moment. I think, Marcus said slowly, I've been afraid of both our tempers. Yours reminds me of my father sometimes, but my withdrawal hurts you like your father hurt you by being absent. It was the most insightful Marcus had ever voiced. It was the most insight Marcus had ever voiced about their dynamic, and Emily felt a rush of connection. We're both so afraid of becoming what we hated in our parents that we're triggering each other's worst fears, finding their polar north. That conversation became what their therapist later called their telos moment, when they identified a higher purpose that could guide their resolution process. They realized they both wanted the same thing, to create a relationship unlike the ones they had grown up witnessing, where emotions could be expressed safely and where love didn't come with conditions. What if we stop seeing our conflicts as me versus you, Emily suggested, and start seeing them as us versus the patterns we inherited? This reframing represented what they would later understand as the reconciling force, the third element that could transform their opposition into growth. They weren't just Emily and Marcus with conflicting needs. They were two people working together to heal intergenerational wounds. Their therapist introduced them to the concept of ambivalence in its truest sense, recognizing that both sides of the conflict held importance and value. Emily's desire for clarity and communication, wasn't wrong, nor was Marcus's need for emotional space. The challenge wasn't to determine which person was right, but to honor both the needs simultaneously. Name the ambivalence, their therapist encouraged. Acknowledge feeling trapped between important values. Well, I feel trapped between my need for connection and my fear of being controlled, Marcus practiced saying. Well, I feel trapped between my need for responsiveness and fear of being too demanding, Emily acknowledged. The upward spiral. As they learned to work with their tensions consciously, Emily and Marcus began moving up what their therapist called the developmental spiral. Each successfully navigated conflict, becoming a bridge to a higher order relationship. One significant breakthrough came when they discussed their shared desire to raise children in the Christian faith. Despite their complicated relationships with religion, both had grown up with images of God that mirrored their parents. For Emily, a demanding perfectionist keeping score of failures. For Marcus, an unpredictable force alternating between comfort and punishment. I don't want our children to inherit our wounded images of God, Emily said one evening. But I don't know how to offer something different when it's all I know. This honest confession created another moment of potentiated tension. Rather than dismissing her concern or offering a quick solution, Marcus sat with the question, maybe healing our relationship with each other is the first step towards healing our relationship with God, he suggested. Maybe love is learned relationally first. This insight marked another turn in their developmental spiral, a resolution that created potential for engaging with an even higher level contrast. Becoming midwives. Over time, Emily and Marcus became more skilled at what they called midwifing resolution for each other. They learned to recognize when tensions were going unconscious, emerging as projection, blame, or withdrawal, and gently bring them into conscious awareness where they could be worked with productivity. Emily became more aware of how her critical inner voice, her internalized mother, drove her to impossible standards that she then projected onto Marcus. Marcus began to recognize how his emotional withdrawal wasn't protection, but a reenactment of his father's emotional unavailability after the charming facade dropped away. We carry these internal conflicts, the therapist explained, but when we bring them into the light together, they become opportunities for growth rather than the forces of destruction. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. No, they still argued. They still triggered each other's deepest wounds, but increasingly, they could step back and recognize when they were caught in old patterns. Emily would say, I notice I'm feeling that anxious pressure in my chest, catching herself before launching into criticism. I think I'm afraid of losing control here. Marcus would acknowledge, I notice I'm shutting down. Think I'm afraid of being overwhelmed by emotion. These acknowledgments created space for their higher values, their polar north, to guide their responses rather than reacting from unconscious fear. The new arising. 5 years into marriage, Emily and Marcus welcomed their daughter, Sophia. As they held her between them in the hospital room, they experienced what Marcus called a fourth dimension, a new arising that transcended their individual stories and even their relationship. I look at her and I feel both terrified and hopeful, Emily whispered. I don't want to pass on what hurt me. Marcus nodded. I think that awareness itself, the breakthrough. Our parents didn't know what they were passing on, but we can know. In Sophia's presence, they found themselves confronting a new level contrast between the parenting that they had received and the parenting they wanted to provide. This created fresh tensions that required even more conscious resolution. but they now had tools their parents never possessed. Not just therapeutic concepts, but a lived experience of transforming pain rather than transmitting it. They had discovered that the law of three wasn't just a philosophical framework, but a practical path for moving from unconscious reactivity to conscious response and growth. Every contrast creates potential for tension, Emily often reminded Marcus when they found themselves in conflict. Oh, and every tension creates potential for resolution. And smiling, Marcus would add, yep, and every resolution, love, creates potential for a higher level contrast. They both realized how far they had come in that moment. Together, they continued their spiral journey upward, not eliminating contrast or tension from their lives, but learning to engage with it consciously, creating from their inherited pain a legacy of awareness, intention, and love that would shape not just their lives, but generations to come. The very wounds of their childhood pain became the foundation upon which they stood at the next level of metanoia. The very falling down became the grace to stand up higher. And with that, we move forward in our journeys, brothers and sisters, in gratitude. As this presentation has come to an end, there is yet another story. And I invite you to my website, cosmicchrist.net. There you will find this particular post, this article with all the images that are discussed here. And you will also see the story that I just read. And the next story will be the sacred deconstruction. Emily and Marcus find God anew. So this really tracks, this second story would track the journey Emily and Marcus found in their relationship with God. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been a sacred dance, a perichoresis between the two of us, you and I. So may this principle of teleopotentiation, the very primal force that ushers in, inaugurates ongoing and eternal development in God. And we get to be the participants of this. May this force bless us, bless you, bless me on our journeys as we walk each other home in love and in gratitude, not absent or without stress or conflicts, but rather in them, through them, helping each other in solidarity carry our cross. Amen.